So thank you, everyone. My name is Nazreen Mani. I'm the Executive Director of the Global Apprenticeship Network. It's my privilege to moderate this session this afternoon. I want to give a shout out to all of you who are joining online, and a special word of welcome to all of my panelists. And with the exception of Mardi, everyone has come in from out of town. Well, actually, Mardi, you're from out of town too. So thank you very much for the hospitality. Kansas City, Missouri. I was told to include that yesterday. It's been really interesting listening to everyone this morning, to observing yesterday, participating in the workshops and learning about the work that DOL and other partners are doing. And I think really what we're here to talk today about is a private sector perspective on all of these important topics. What is happening in the world of work? What is happening in terms of workforce development, in terms of labor market shifts? I think the last 2 years has seen seismic changes in the world of work, the nature of work, the modalities of work. And I've asked my very good friends sitting here, who will each introduce themselves in a few minutes, to come and share a little bit about what their organizations are doing globally, across the US, and then specifically, what are they doing in Missouri? And how can you as Missourians and the other partners from out of town who are interested in really shaping dynamic, responsive, and relevant workforces, what can we learn from my guests today? I'm going to start with Nick Morgan and ask him to introduce himself. Next is Nika Thompson. I don't know that Mardi needs any more introduction, but I'm going to have him say hello. Molly Conway from the Adecco Group, Fontes Mark from Nestle Purina, and Dana Chambly from Accenture. So let's start with you, Nick.
Hello, everyone. I'm Nicholas Morgan with Adaptive Construction Solutions. We are an apprenticeship intermediary that's supported by the U.S. Department of Labor through an Apprenticeship Building America grant. And we specifically work with employers to develop partnerships with public workforce system, as well as community organizations, but in a way to leverage existing resources that are often not utilized for apprenticeship expansion. Most notably, we utilize WIOA, which is the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, which is the central and largest mechanism that's allocated through appropriations from Congress every year to integrate that directly into apprenticeships. And this work really encourages a high level of integration of improving diversity, equity, inclusion, because it creates an atmosphere where the community and workforce funding is being used to co-invest in a person's career pathways. We all know that apprenticeships, employers make the central investment, but intermediaries are necessary to combine that investment with the needs of employers. So thank you for having me here today, and look forward to discussing apprenticeships in the private sector.
Thank you, Nick. And what Nick is not saying is he's a decorated former veteran who has used his life experiences, his knowledge from the military, and has taken him a pathway down into apprenticeships and the value that apprenticeships can offer for family-sustaining, life-sustaining employment and skills. So he'll share a little bit more probably when he gives his input in a few minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Nika, thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Nanika Thompson. I come to you from Washington, D.C. on behalf of Amazon Web Services, or AWS. I work for a small global team called Digital Skills Enablement, where our mandate is to help more learners get trained and certified in the cloud at no cost to them. And so throughout this panel, you'll hear a little bit more about how we do just that.
Thank you. Marty.
Well, thank you. It's a true honor to share the stage and to share our home state and to be here in Kansas City, Missouri, home of the Kansas City Chiefs, for those that pay attention. And for those that are with us virtually, thank you for joining us. It's really True privilege to be able to have an opportunity to live stream this event truly across the globe. So hello to our partners in the United Kingdom. Great shout out for the United Kingdom Missouri Apprenticeship Partnership Program. Hello to our colleagues in Europe and South America, as well as Africa and Australia. So we're really excited that we have a global reach all the way from here in Kansas City, Missouri. As Nazreen said, I'm Dr. Marty Leathers. I've had the privilege of serving our governor as a state director of workforce development for 5 years in Missouri. I also oversee Missouri Apprenticeships and the Apprenticeship Missouri community and brand I'm proud to be a part of. And I also work closely with our State Workforce Development Board as this executive director, many who are here today. So thank you for all who are logging on or live with us today.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm Molly Conway. I'm with the ADECO Group. I lead our public affairs and communications efforts here in North America. The ADECO Group is the leading HR and talent solutions company in the world, headquartered in Zurich. So we have a long history of apprenticeship. Prior to coming to the ADECO Group about 1.5 years ago, I spent 14 years in the government, labor and employment attorney by trade. So I worked on the Ed and Labor Committee, the House Ed and Labor Committee, the Senate Help Committee, and then finished my career at the Department of Labor. Excited to be here and join this conversation.
Hello, everyone. Fontes Mark. I'm the Vice President of Human Resources at Nestle Purina, and I'm responsible for our manufacturing organization. So really work a lot with our factories that are out there. And we all know, and we've talked about it throughout the day, of the shortage of the technical and that talent that we need. So really was honored really to be asked to be a part of this panel, to come and talk about what we're trying to do to upskill our workforce and to find that right talent and give individuals the opportunities to continue to grow. I've been with Nestle Purina for 16 years, and Nestle, as the global company, has been a part of the global apprenticeship network, and really honored to be here, so thank you.
Hello, my name is Dana Shambly, and I am a managing director in Accenture's Health and Public Service practice based in St. Louis. I lead all of our public sector work within the state of Missouri, so that includes everything at the state, local, and education level. I have been engaged and involved with Accenture's efforts around apprentices since we first launched our first employer network, which I'm sure I'll get a chance to talk about here, in 2017. So really excited to be a part of this conference and looking forward to the discussion today.
Thank you, everyone. And you can see this is a highly experienced panel representing multiple sectors across the economy, sectors that are growing, sectors that are desperately in need for skilled people. And I think the conversation here today is really to help us find out how we can shape these skills, the role of the private sector in delivering training. But I want to emphasize, and it's the running theme for today, the role of partnerships and collaboration. The Global Apprenticeship Network is a convening platform. We work, as our name suggests, across the globe, 16 different countries, head officed in Switzerland. We work with the global policy development agencies, so the International Labour Organization, the OECD. We also work closely with country systems. So we've been recipients of grants from the US Department of Labor, the Commonwealth, and other partners. And I think we have probably one of the most interesting perspectives on workforce development, work-based learning, and apprenticeships, because we have this global reach. We bring together the private sector, we engage in peer-to-peer learning, we engage in thought leadership, we leverage the strength and voice of our business leaders to advocate for apprenticeships. They're a powerful voice, they're influential, and we work with policymakers, we work with trade unions, we work with all of the stakeholders who are critical to shape an enabling apprenticeship system, an enabling workforce development system, and the heart of it is partnership and collaboration. So I'm really keen to have the panel share today. And Molly, I'm going to start with you. And Molly said, the ADECO Group is the world's leading HR business, private employment services, research, and all of the other really important issues that come under talent development. And I want Molly to share some pretty heavy data points, but I think important to give context. And Molly, you know, how do you forecast for the US labor market? It's changing pretty rapidly, but the Adecco Group does a lot of research, a lot of analysis. Share with us, I think, what's going on and some suggestions to policymakers and employers about planning and skilling.
Happy to. We only know what we know. I don't have a crystal ball, so I wish I could share what we see happening in the future. But there are many factors beyond the pandemic that are really influencing the pace of change that's shaping the future of work. I'll walk through data-heavy trends, and I'm going to have to read off my sheet because I'm not good with numbers. But we have this broad view of workforce trends, and we recently highlighted a few of them in our Global Workforce of the Future report. So it's a lot of data and numbers. Again, bear with me as I read off my sheet. But I'm happy to engage if anyone has questions. So the first trend we're seeing, and everyone's heard of it, is the Great Resignation. We've all heard of it. We've seen in the past year that quit rates have been the highest they've ever been since BLS started measuring that in 2000. We recently found that 3 in 10 Americans want to leave their current job in the next 12 months. 61% would like to stay in their current job, but among them, 27% would like to be offered some sort of career progression or upskilling or reskilling opportunities to stay with that employer, but in a new role. There are subtleties beyond these numbers, especially when it comes to the Great Resignation, that paint a more complex picture. Quit rates are really only one piece of the puzzle, and the widespread movement of talent cannot be captured in a single data point. The next trend we're seeing are candidates as consumers. This is a new mentality where candidates are consumers and it's a buyer's market. Globally, the vast majority of workers, 72%, feel secure and are not concerned about losing their job, which is a significant increase from 61% in 2021. More than 2/3 of Americans are confident they could find a new job within 6 months, even facing the economic uncertainty that we're facing today. This number is, of course, higher among millennials and Gen Z. I'll leave it to you to figure out why. But third is the rise of the quitfluencer. This is a snappy new word I think we've probably seen on social media. But quitting sprees trigger 70% of colleagues to consider quitting themselves. It's a staggering number. And 50% of workers who see others quit have acted and decide to quit within the next 12 months. Gen Z is 2.5 times more likely to quit if they see others quit than baby boomers. And LinkedIn's Workforce Confidence Index found Gen Z is changing jobs at a rate of 134% higher than they were in 2019, while baby boomers are actually switching at 4% less than they were in 2019. There's a huge disparity among the different generations. And then finally, in the same vein, quiet quitting. There's also quiet firing. So quiet quitting and quiet firing are both symptoms of passive workplace culture, creating feelings of detachment, disengagement, and often lead to a toxic workplace. This can obviously be tied to quitfluencing, and it's another trend that we're seeing now in this buyer's market. So, suggested approaches for employers, on to the solutions. Globally, the employer is seen by workers as responsible for better working future, followed by the worker themselves and the government last. Obviously, this varies country by country, but that is the global average. Employee success and satisfaction, it's intuitive that an employee needs to feel successful and satisfied in their workplace for retention, but it's also not that simple. Current job satisfaction is high. Approximately 69% of workers have overall job satisfaction, which is a 2% increase from 2021. But among workers who want to change their job in the next 12 months, this is the disengaged worker, a better salary was the #1 reason, followed by work-life balance, career progression opportunities, and then skilling and training opportunities. However, salary is interestingly less important to people who are engaged, who feel connected to their workforce, connected to their employer. Workers surveyed who said they want to stay with their current employer for the next 12 months said they would do so because, and these are in order, 1, they're happy, 2, job stability, 3, a good work-life balance, 4, they like their colleagues, 5, flexibility, and then 6, salary. So it goes to show that it's, if you keep your employees engaged, and that should be your #1 priority, but if you keep your employees engaged, there's a lot more to it than salary, and there are a lot of other factors out there for you to consider. Individuals who are engaged are hungry for what's next. They want their employers to invest in them, and they want to invest in their employers in return. So finally, my suggestions for policymakers. Obviously, with the exception of important wage and hour laws and occupational safety and health laws, when policymakers start thinking about what they want to do, they should give employers the space to do what is best and most needed for their particular workforce. There isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. Sometimes policymakers hear a good or bad employer story and then try to apply that across the board. I remember that many times from my time on the Hill. But my recommendation to policymakers would be, before drafting, co-sponsoring, voting on legislation that would impact an employer, meet with your constituent employers, meet with your constituent employees, see how it would impact your district or your state, and understand the practical and not just theoretical implications of that particular legislation, rule, whatever it might be. So that's what I have. I'll turn it back to Nazreen.
Thanks, Molly. So in short, a lot of complexity. But I think the points that you've mentioned are so important because it speaks to the need for the employer to be engaged. Engaged employees take their lead from engaged employers. And I think that's one takeaway you can probably all want to tweet. NAW, hashtag NAW 2022. The other message is skills coming up in the rankings of what employers are looking for, the need for progression, the need for development, the need for recognition. So employers in the room, take note. I'm sure Molly, you will be happy to reach out with some of these research papers, fascinating information. Nanika, you come from an industry that's changing probably even faster than most mainstream sectors. So perhaps you can tell us what AWS is doing in terms of responding to these developments, to the rise of technology. And I think the important issue in this space is around inclusion because, digital divides are real, they're global. Making sure we reach marginalized and vulnerable communities to integrate them into these emerging sectors is key. So happy for you to share and for us to learn from you. Thank you.
Sure. And so first, the technology that I'm talking about today is the cloud. AWS is the largest cloud provider globally. And cloud is the on-demand delivery of IT resources with pay-as-you-go pricing. So you can think of it as a light switch. You turn the light switch on, you're paying for electricity and light, you turn it off, you no longer need that service, and you're not getting charged for it. And so when we say that we're trying to be more inclusive as an industry, we mean an environment that attracts and develops remarkably bright, driven, and inventive builders of all backgrounds. So the way that we do that is that the strategy we use is to understand the skills that employers need and then to find ways to make that training available to develop those skills. There's a couple things that are really important to that strategy for us and my team in particular, and that's collaborating with organizations that are upskilling individuals who are new to tech. So think 0 to 3 years of experience, and that could be entry level, but it could also be career changers who are looking to break into the field. The other thing is creating access, and so that's helping more learners be able to get their education, earn a credential by defraying or totally eliminating their educational expense. And so here's an example of what I mean by that. This past summer, we partnered with the Ohio Chamber of Commerce to deliver a workforce summit across the state. And that event was around 2 state-led funding initiatives. One is called TechCred, and the other one is called IMAP. Maybe you've heard of them. The goal was to help Ohio employers, some of them being AWS customers, better understand how to access these training funds. TechCred is it's an employer reimbursement for technology-based credentials. And so employers can be reimbursed up to $2,000 per credential. And that's funding that's available for rounds throughout the year. On the other hand, IMAP is for micro-credentials, and it's to help Ohio residents who are in between jobs or who just aren't making enough, not a sustainable income. And so that reimbursement is for training providers. So when we talk about IT skills and IT readiness, both of those initiatives are really important because they help close the skills gap and they help diversify the talent pipeline that we're talking about here today. These types of events that we have really, they help enable the sharing between government, businesses, workforce leaders, and education leaders. And so those are some of the things that we're doing around building an inclusive industry.
Thank you so much. And I think, again, you're speaking to the need for collaboration, working with policymakers, working with your customers, bringing them all into conversation. And I think that information sharing is critical. Fontes, I'm going to come to you, and I work very closely with the Nestlé team in Switzerland, but also the Nestlé team across the world. And as a manufacturing business, you were particularly challenged during COVID. And I think, it would be interesting to hear from you how you managed, because I know that there was a pivot in how training was delivered. And I think we'd also like to hear what you have learned from that and will keep going forward.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, COVID for a manufacturing organization definitely opened our eyes to some new things. One, being a company like Nestlé Purina, there wasn't a lot of challenges, honestly, in finding talent. When the pandemic hit and COVID hit, there was a lot of unknowns in the world. And we had individuals, because our manufacturing factories didn't shut down. And there were a lot of jobs that did. And there were a lot of jobs that went to work from home basis and that allowed their employees to work from home. When you're in a manufacturing environment, that's not a possibility. We have to continue producing that. For us, it was the cat food, the dog food, the cat litter. For all the pets out there that, they have to have what they need to survive as well. So how do we do that? And when the talent's not there, and a lot of people changed what they were looking for, other employers in the rooms changed kind of what they were looking for as well. People started paying more, honestly, to find that talent. So that became a challenge. So we learned quickly that we couldn't just go find the talent that already had the skill sets that we needed. So we started building upon the apprenticeship and what we had before internships. We started building upon those programs and starting to grow them rapidly. So we brought individuals in and we gave them that path. We worked with high schools. We talked to students that were out there that knew right away college wasn't the route they wanted to go. So we started forming some partnerships with local high schools, and we worked with them. And the nice part about it is we got individuals that had no background in manufacturing. We got people that came to us from a retail industry, or they came to us from a fast food industry with no skill sets in manufacturing, but we had to make sure we had safe and quality programs in place to train them. The nice part is we had a lot of this in place by a management development program that we already had. And we had those in place for our college grads. because obviously they want to come in and they want to move up in the organization to be part of that management team. Well, that's the basis for anyone. Anyone wants to move up and grow and have the ability to, provide for their family and to grow successfully and make a career at a company and not just have that job. So I think that was the biggest thing. The other part, and Molly hit on it when she was talking, was internally. And as we started talking to our workforce more and learning about the individuals that had the interest in upskilling and growing those skill sets, they might have been a great production operator and had worked on an extruder for us for years. They wanted to become that next maintenance mechanic that we had because they wanted to get to that next stage that they could, again, get to a next piece of their career. And that was something that, honestly, looking ourselves in the mirror, we didn't do a good enough job for before the pandemic. And once that hit, we really did start investing in that. And I'll talk a little bit more later, but we really invest in our people, and we started partnerships. And really, we didn't call it an apprenticeship an accredited apprenticeship because we weren't there yet. But I've had some conversations with Marty, and we're definitely getting there because what we started doing is providing people those opportunities to upskill. And they worked 20 hours a week. We paid for them to go back to school, to go to technical colleges. We paid for that. So they got paid full-time jobs. They got paid 40 hours a week. They only worked 20. They went to the technical college. They got the training that they needed there, and then they're bringing that skill set back to us, improving them and improving the organization. And I think that's what we've learned going forward, that was a true value and something that we can continue to grow upon.
Thanks, Fontes. And I think it's really mature for an organization to reflect and see where improvements can be made, to learn from, just practice and what can be improved. So thank you for being that candid. Dana, I don't know how many people in the room know how innovative Accenture is regarding apprenticeships. And I think it would be really important for you to share the Accenture work, the work being done to break down stigmas around apprenticeships, and really how apprenticeships in white-collar spaces can actually respond to these increasing skills demands.
Yeah, absolutely. So Accenture is, we've always recognized that our assets are our people. We don't manufacture anything. We don't build software. We are technology agnostic. We work with all sorts of technology partners, including AWS. And really, we saw that we needed to invest in building the skills of our people and going and finding the best talent. So what we did is we started looking at what are the trends. As Fontes mentioned, not everyone wants to go to a four-year college anymore. That's not where the technology skills are really being built and developed in today's society. And so we went out and sought that. And what we wanted to do was start working with our clients and our partners to look at building networks that can access that talent. And so in 2017, we joined with some of our partners, including Aon, Zurich, McDonald's, Walgreens in Chicago, and we built an employer-led apprentice network where we looked at, okay, how can we start incorporating this whole new pool of talent into this network and connecting employers. There was a lot of education involved of why this was important, how we were going to build these networks, where we were going to source them. Today, actually this week, we are launching our 9th employer network in New York City. In fact, I think that's happening today. So we have worked over the course of the program with 138 different unique employers. We have hired over 2,200 apprentices to date. We have set goals for ourselves of where we want to be as far as apprenticeship hiring. We have set a goal to hire 10,000 apprentices by the year 2030. So in order to do that, we partner with community organizations. We partner with community colleges here in Missouri. This year alone, we've hired about 25 different apprentices over our 3 locations in Missouri. And we have partnered with organizations in St. Louis like Launch Code and Empower to really identify that talent. We work with organizations like Rung for Women, who have provided a lot of great talent resource pools. We've worked with community colleges. And I think the important thing is we're bringing our clients along on that journey and allowing them to see the benefit of that. So even in our own work with the state of Missouri, as part of our most recent award there, we've committed to hiring 6 to 10 apprentices each year of the program that we're going to be there, and we're bringing them on. This year already, I think we are at 7 for that one program. We're going to bring them on, we're going to train them, and at the end of their apprenticeship, they're going to understand the state systems, they're going to understand, and we're moving the state to the cloud, and so they're going to understand those cloud technologies, and they're going to be available. They're local, they're going to be available for the state to hire, they're going to be available to come back to us, or they're going to be available to join the workforce in Missouri, which is one of the things that we're really invested in with each of our networks as well as each of our offices, of just building that talent locally and making sure that we are being good community partners.
Thank you so much, Dana. And I think you've touched on the role that apprentices play in terms of the talent pipeline, identifying early talent, retention, productivity, and all of the other very tangible aspects that we need to show on the bottom line. But ultimately, the biggest intrinsic value is the talent themselves and how we need to nurture and develop it. So thank you for that. Nick, you've been involved in this space now for a few years. You've been shaking things up as you've been going along. But I think, for many employers, it's quite intimidating to navigate the apprenticeship policy space. So what advice would you give to companies who are interested but perhaps haven't stepped in to actively training or just need more support?
Well, the first part is they got to remember why registered apprenticeship. Let's talk about it in its truest form for a minute. And there's an enormous value that comes from formalizing it and making it a registered program. And the reason is first, now you have made a true promise to an apprentice. And that promise is that you're going to provide them the means to accelerate their career, and that you're demonstrating that you are now investing in them. As the president of ACS with 84 workforce development professionals, I often think of my own team. Do they know on Sunday what their week looks like and that they have a path within ACS? Every company struggles with this, no matter the size, is reminding their workers that there's a path for them and that they're willing to make a promise to their employees as long as they hold up their end of the bargain as well. And so by looking at that and agreeing, let's put some structure, but still keep it flexible. But hey, here's the minimum pieces that we're going to do at this timeline. It then also allows for co-investment in the apprenticeship. And that is by leveraging workforce funding, right? It's great with partnerships because you're creating win-wins. Everybody knows what the expectation is. And so when we think about how do we meet our continued workforce needs around the country, and how does employers address those metrics and statistics that Molly pointed out, it's by doing it differently. Stop competing the same way for the same talent. Instead, start looking at talent that maybe you never even considered and say, look, as a business, I'm going to invest. This is expensive, but what is on the table? So we've put 1,300 veterans and youth into registered apprenticeships over the last 6 years as we try to figure this out. And what we always did, 100% of the time, was we made sure we did not do a train and pray model, but build trust across everybody because it started with employment. We never trained anyone unless we were putting them in a job. I get it, it's expensive, especially because these companies were training them and paying them while they're in the classroom too. And you're thinking, what company can afford to do that? Well, by doing that, 80% of our apprentices, the employer received a wage support through what's called an on-the-job training contract, that they received a percentage of the wage, cash, a check, that comes to them, not just for while they were in the classroom, but for the first 4 or 6 months. And that's a co-investment. It's not a subsidy, right? And by doing that, employers also become a little bit more patient to give this person the ability to further develop, right? And so what does this all equate to? This is a business case for apprenticeship. We have a company here today, Blue Ridge Power, that just signed their apprenticeship standards. And they are one of the largest engineering procurement companies, not just in the nation, but in the globe. They produced or installed 6 gigawatts, 6,000 megawatts of solar power over the last decade. And they were doing apprenticeship long before the Inflation Reduction Act. As a matter of fact, their first apprenticeship just happened to get signed when the Inflation Reduction Act passed Congress. And that was a path for them, that they were wanting to do it. And they were building it through partnerships, both in North Carolina and in other states, and realized that it's not something they do alone. But anyone in the apprenticeship space and all the roles that we play, none of us do all the work. It is always done collaboratively. And it's always to address the needs of the employer, but it only works when there's value for the apprentice. So that's the business case for it, because compete differently, develop talent differently, create some rigidity to it, because now you've managed expectations. And by doing that, we've pushed almost $20 million in WIOA funds to these businesses. Some of them have received well over $1 million in wage support for apprentices. So the money's out there, but they were hiring people with disabilities. They were hiring veterans that transitioned and had became homeless or insecure about their housing situation. And that is a critical piece, is you're going to look at some people differently. You still can upskill your current workers, but you've got to think about how you do business and do it differently.
Thanks, Nick. That's quite inspiring. And I'm going to suggest to the audience that they visit the ACS website and see some of the videos that you have speaking about these transformative effects that an apprenticeship can have on people's life, not just in terms of the skills acquired, but really the ability to use that skill to get a job and find housing, pay off debt, get a car. It's just amazing what an apprenticeship can do. But again, it comes to that issue of partnership, collaboration, working together as trusted partners is key. Marty, you've heard the panel speak, different sector perspectives. What's your advice to employers, policymakers, and learners about embracing the new opportunities that are coming our way in terms of emerging sectors, technologies, and skills?
Thank you, Nazarene. You know, it's very humbling to be at this stage with such great stories, such great emphasis that is meaningful and that makes impact. And the theme for the 5th annual Apprenticeship Missouri Summit is connecting opportunities to outcomes. And those of you that maybe were around during LBGA time will remember that was a key term that he used a lot. Never waste a good opportunity to grab an outcome. And that's what we're thinking about, right? We're connecting an opportunity, whether it's creating a training program or creating new occupational standards or linking an employer with a pool of talent to say, these are opportunities. The state of Missouri does not hire apprentices. I mean, we do, but we haven't hired the 27,000 apprentices that we talked about creating this morning, right? But what we do work on is collaborating and connecting opportunities and pulling training providers to the table, pulling funders to the table. You know, Nick, I really appreciate your comments and the you know, the panelists as they talk about industry-led apprenticeship programs. Often as policymakers, as education providers or training providers, as government wonks, we like to say we could solve the problem. And usually the private sector will say, yeah, go fix it for us, but then not be happy with how we do it. But apprenticeships, and we're purists in Missouri, apprenticeships have to have that quality standard tied to registration. And guess what? In Missouri, you're not an apprentice if you're not tied directly to an employment opportunity. There's an employer at the table from day one, or a network or an association of employers at the table day one. So even when we're working with our youth apprenticeship programs, expanding those, it's not just because it's a cool thing to do. I mean, it is, but it's about leveraging opportunities in those communities where those local school districts are connected to solve some of the labor market challenges that those communities are having, rural, urban, or otherwise. So we're just thrilled to see our continued growth and expansion of apprenticeships. Missouri's proud to be a top 3 state. We're proud to be a state that has the long history and tradition of Purina, the old Ralston Purina checkerboard square. For those that are from Missouri, remember that, and now part of the Nestle family. We love that we have the Accenture office, and we have Accenture Federal that's invested in Missouri. We're very much involved in cloud and making transition and connecting through tons and tons. We've heard a lot about tech today. And just thinking about how do we be more intentional about connecting the dots, right? Connecting those opportunities, which is what we're here for, right? Creating an opportunity, an idea, right? An avenue with a true outcome, which sometimes doesn't happen, right? That outcome is what? Sustainable employment, right? It's about broadened economic prosperity for every individual, accessing a life of dignity. It sounds cheesy, but that's what we're here for in workforce development, right? And so our mission and our purpose is really about that. So it gets exciting. It's thrilling. It's, numbers are cool to say, but as I said this morning, every number is tied to a citizen, a human, and that is remarkable, and we're just proud to be a part of that.
Thank you so much, Marty. And I think the other point I want to make is, having heard from these companies, the private sector voice, I think something that we need to be more intentional about in policy making is bringing the private sector perspective into the design of policy, not just as the recipient or implementer of policy, but really engaging meaningfully to understand the intent of the policy and the practicality of policy. I think that's the heart of policy making. GAN's focus is that. In fact, we call ourselves a policy translator, because the other reality is policy gets lost in legalese, and the people who are training on a factory floor or in an AWS lab, they don't want to read policy. They just want a how-to guide to deliver the training to the quality standards. And I think working in this kind of approach means that we have to talk. We have to have hard conversations sometimes. We won't always be friends, but it doesn't mean that we can't engage. And I hope that this kind of discussion today continues at a state level, federal level, and at a global level.
Thank you for that, Nazarene. If I can just add, when employers take the lead and assume that risk, right? Public policy is all about understanding where the markets stop and where there's a gap left, right? And economists call it market failure. It sounds like a bad term, but the reality is it's just, some things the market will take all the way to the end to create that outcome. Sometimes the market is only designed to come to a certain point, and then that's when a public intervention comes in, right? Workforce development, education, healthcare, all those fun things. Regardless of your political philosophy, you understand there's a gap that has to be mitigated, and that's the gap that we're trying to both exploit and close with registered apprenticeship, with internships, with work-based learning, all the different programs. And even in Missouri, we're thinking about, okay, we care a lot about registered apprenticeship. I said we're purist, but we created a certified pre-apprenticeship program that ties back to a registered apprenticeship. We now are talking about apprenticeships and work-based learning and thinking more broadly about how we connect these things, because it's okay if you are doing the same thing that a registered apprenticeship's doing, but not calling it an apprenticeship. Or maybe it's just shy, maybe it's a 9-month program, it doesn't quite get that 2,080 hour requirement. We don't want to throw that out. That's a great program. Let's recognize that in the best way we can, while at the same time maintaining the quality that is important around the standard of registered apprenticeship.
Thanks, Wadi. Fontes, Purina is a global brand, but you're housed here in Missouri. And I think, I'm sure the audience will want to hear from you what your take is on local skills needs and how is Purina adapting and responding to the citizens' needs.
Yeah, thank you. We are headquartered in St. Louis, Missouri. Missouri is definitely very important to us. We have manufacturing organizations all across the United States, as well as Missouri. So St. Joseph, Missouri, Bloomfield, Missouri. We've got one locally in St. Louis as well. We've got our support center there. So Missouri is a definite important spot for us to focus. We are global, and Nestle has a long-lasting work in apprenticeships. And I think what I'll focus on first is where Marty ended, right? For us at Purina specifically, we probably have 4 of the 5 key factors, and Marty and I talked about this recently, for that registered apprenticeship. And, it is employer driven, but it's something that we partner with our employees on, because if it's not a partnership, it's not going to work. It just won't, and we've learned that. But we do have a structured on-the-job training. That's in place. We're going to continue that. The technical instructions, I talked about that. We partner with, whether it's community colleges, Rankin Technical School as well. That's another one that we use. Rockwell is a company that we work with for controls, for our control specialists. So we have those types of relationships in place. And then, the rewards for skill gains. We talked about that. There's got to be value there. So as individuals pick up those additional skills, they are rewarded. So really, we have all of that in place. And I think for Purina specifically, so Nestle, I'll start there real quick, we've started in the United States, and we do have over 70 registered apprenticeships now in the United States, 12 different locations. So we're happy with that, but we're not satisfied with that. And I think that's where the relationship with Marty and starting those conversations of getting to what that true value of that registered apprenticeship is important to us. And we've learned a lot more, really even over these last 6 months, on what that is and why we should do that and just taking that extra step. So for us, I think that's the biggest thing, is just taking that last step. Nestle as an organization is committed to the next generation of the workforce. We have that set from our global organization. Here in the United States, they've set a goal that we need to contact and make, visible contact with over 130,000 youths or veterans that are looking for employment. Right now we're on pace to do that with about 148,000 contacts this year. So, that's something that we take pride in, and we do look to continue that, and the state of Missouri is going to be a big spot to start that, and we are looking at an apprenticeship right now. We're in some conversations with one of our local unions and looking to partner with them as well. Because we do have union and non-union locations, and you need to have those partnerships to make this successful and make it work.
Thank you. Absolutely. I think the message is there's no room for complacency. It has to be very intentional. It has to be built into the organizational strategy, and it's a privilege to see Nestle leadership take ownership of this approach and drill it down throughout the organization. So thank you for sharing. Molly, you're our data specialist on the panel today. And I think what I want to understand is in those very broad US-focused statistics you shared, can we drill down a little bit further into Missouri to understand what the key touch points are? So where are the important shifts in the labor market, the key skills that are needed, and perhaps some advice to those in the room involved in, as employers, as educators, what to target?
Sure. So I'm back with my data and reading my sheet, so bear with me. But I'll start with some rapid Missouri-related facts. They come from LinkedIn Talent Insights. All of these trends generally are the same, actually, in Missouri as they are across the U.S. So the 3 fastest growing occupations in Missouri year over year: recruiters, product managers, and software engineers. Same 3 throughout the U.S., just in a different order, and you'll see that pattern throughout. 3 fastest growing skills year over year in Missouri: customer experience, Python, programming language, I know very little about that, and analytical skills. The most densely populated professional occupational titles, mouthful: owner, teacher, and president. This may seem odd, right? They're very general titles, but 80% of Missouri businesses employ fewer than 10 people. 96.4% of businesses employ up to 49 workers. So you would have a lot of people with the title of owner or president with so many small businesses. The top 3 occupational titles based on 1-year growth: intern, software engineer, and program manager. From the same data set, some top 3 employers by 1-year growth include being self-employed and, interestingly enough, McDonald's. And then occupations with the most job openings are, not surprising, nurses, given the pandemic, truck drivers, we've all heard the need for truck drivers across the US, and salespeople. Certainly with my shopping over COVID, there is need for more salespeople. So some solutions, innovative solutions to align the emerging labor market needs. Skilling and job progression opportunities are really what we're seeing as being most important in this space. So according to the Missouri Workforce 2021 Employer Survey, employers listed a shortage of workers with knowledge or skills to be the top barrier to expanding employment in Missouri. None of this is a surprise to anyone in the room or listening to us online. But this increased from 60% to 60% in 2021 from 47% in 2019. So a pretty big jump. 68% of employers in Missouri reported they have a shortage of skilled applicants. That's compared to only 28% of respondents in 2019. So obviously, I would be remiss if I didn't mention apprenticeship as a solution to align the emerging labor market needs across the U.S. We've talked about that quite a bit today, and we'll continue to speak about it throughout the day. But other skilling opportunities, as I mentioned earlier, our report surveyed those that want to stay with their current company. Many want, career progression. We've heard that throughout the panel today. Investing in your workforce, super important. 77% of workers believe that they have a skill gap. The younger generations feel this skill gap more prominently. 86% of Gen Z and 84% of millennials think that they have a skills gap. So recommendations for employers. We all know there's a talent shortage, but what we also need to focus on is retention. It's not just finding the right talent, but retaining the good talent you have and investing in them. So some recommendations. 1, address dissatisfaction. With career development opportunities, career conversations, performance reviews, spend time with your employees. Make sure, it's not just top management that's making decisions, but you have buy-in from middle management so they can cascade the messages properly. Career conversations are a critical part here. Almost a quarter of the workforce reported that they've never had a career progression conversation in their current role. That's astounding. In fact, workers who have fewer career conversations show, as you might imagine, lower satisfaction in their workforce. So another recommendation would be coach leaders. As I talk about this, the middle management level, make sure they have the right performance conversations with colleagues, that they understand the direction of the business, that they understand how they can attract or create these attractive career paths with transparent benefits. Employees want to see transparency. Address expectations head on. And this will help to increase retention. Also will help a lot with quiet quitting, which I mentioned earlier. And then finally, I feel like I'm repeating myself, but invest in skills mapping, reskilling, upskilling. Once you have these conversations, don't just let them die. Do something about it. Make sure that you're engaging your workforce, and they'll feel more engaged. And we can go back to all of the data I said earlier about what happens when you have an engaged workforce. But these are really important conversations that obviously Nestle has started to have, and I think more employers need to start to have and will start to have over the coming months.
Thank you so much, Molly. And I want to also just make a point from our earlier panel, Jen and colleagues from Coursera and ACT. Many of these resources are available and they're free. So it doesn't need reinvention. It just needs using the resources that are out there, that are available, the toolkits that have been prepared by Apprenticeships Missouri. There's no excuse, I think is what I'm trying to say in short. So thank you so much for that. Nika, AWS works in communities as well, and I think it's important that the private sector role is bigger than just the bottom line. So maybe you want to share some of the efforts, because they're quite expansive, and I think the targets are pretty sizable.
Sure. So as you may know, AWS is a fan of apprenticeship because we use it as our own talent acquisition strategy. We have a military apprenticeship program that we've used to hire over 1,500 apprentices since 2017. And so last year, we started to hear more from our collaborating partners, colleges, boards, about the things that are frustrating their upskilling and reskilling efforts as it relates to IT. Things like a lack of industry knowledge, industry connections, not knowing how and where to find instructors for technical instruction, some of these certification courses. And so now we're trying to model out some things with registered apprenticeships, because our goal really is to help others build what's been helpful to us in terms of feeding our talent needs. And so we are creating new apprenticeships, modeling, modernizing some apprenticeships, adding cloud in there. We're creating more career pathways, and we're talking to our customers more about their hiring needs. So I'll run through some of those. And so you may have seen in the news, it was a press release about New Apprenticeship and Infosys and their work on the West Coast about their cloud apprenticeship. New Apprenticeship has a cloud apprenticeship program, and in the spring they just graduated their first cohort of apprentices that just went through a boot camp. So it was their RTI. And now those apprentices sit with Infosys as tech process associates, where they'll be focusing on giving cloud support to clients. And so that's one example now where we're starting to see more groups have registered apprenticeships that are cloud focused, or starting to just put some cloud courses into their IT programming. Creating career pathways. You know how if you're interested in a medical career or a medical profession, like it's pretty easy to plan out your educational plan. You know what courses you need, you know what schools provide them, you know what certifications you need, you know what scores you need on those certifications. It's pretty easy to figure out costs of certain things and how to move through to the profession that you want. In IT, that's less clear. And so we're trying to figure out how do we make that less ambiguous for learners and the organizations that support them as they try to figure out their own IT career journey. And so we're starting to commission some research to understand where graduates go from AWS courses, where they go in terms of their on-ramp into an entry-level job, and what employers are actually looking for from entry-level candidates, because we want to start to move away from discrete courses with just discrete certifications, but how do you now string things together for a pathway? And so less about help desk technician, but help desk technician, and how do you map that to some of the high-tech careers like software development engineer, that we were talking about earlier. So that's creating career pathways. And then outreach to some of our customers. And so we all know, I'm sure you all know, IT isn't a field where apprenticeship is really prevalent. It's new. It's classic to the skills trades and even in the military, but it's not a training modality that's really well known by tech companies or even just tech departments. And so for that reason, we recognize that it's really been difficult to scale tech apprenticeship and IT apprenticeship. And so we're trying to figure out what's our role in that. We have to think about how we're going to help. And so we're starting to think about how do we engage our customers who are building in the cloud to get the skills that they get, the skilled workforce that they need using apprenticeship. And so educating them about what apprenticeship is, what it's not, who it's for, and also building trust around that model. And somebody said it earlier about like employers and companies telling their own stories about how they're engaging in apprenticeship and the value that that's brought to their organization. That's really important. So we're starting to do some of that now, and with the goal of wherever we see that there's alignment between a customer or an employer in the colleges and the boards that are in our network, connecting them together. And so these are the types of, if these are the types of challenges that are resonating with you, or some of the ideas that are appealing to you, or if there's challenges that I haven't named that you're experiencing even above and beyond these things, I would love to be able to engage with you. I don't know how our information is going to be shared, but I can be found on LinkedIn. If you have your phones out now, you can look me up and say, these are some of the things that I'm challenged with, like can we connect afterwards? I'd love to continue the conversation.
Thank you so much for that invitation. And I think it's something we pick up in our GAN work, that peer-to-peer learning, company-to-company learning is so important, because you may think that you're suffering alone, that it's just you experiencing this, but to Molly's data points, this is a national problem, and I happily say it's a global issue. Others have walked this path and have found some solutions that work. I think sharing, learning, and then solving for X goes a long way. So thank you for that. Nick, you mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act in your earlier input. Perhaps you want to share what that means for apprenticeship training, because I know there's a carrot and a stick contained in the act, and you're probably one of the few people I know who's really unpacked that piece of policy and trying to work and engage with it. So.
No, thank you. And as I start that, a key part of our work with IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, is working with GAN, and especially when they have access to so many, not just employers, but on the investment side, property owners globally that are investing in this really amazing opportunity to help make sure that our grid has resiliency and is prepared for the coming decades. The Inflation Reduction Act had $369 billion in tax credits that will fund a significant portion, between 30 all the way up to 50% of a clean energy project. Now, the key piece of that is 80% of that tax credit is tied to qualified apprentice hours being worked. And what is a qualified apprentice hour? That is an apprentice in a relevant occupation performing work that's within their labor classification. The program is operating in a compliance, within the compliance of Office of Apprenticeship or that state apprenticeship agency, right? And that you stay within some other rules and regulations. Lots of companies are waiting for guidance from the Treasury Department to figure out how to go forward. And that's really a missed opportunity, because everything that you need to know is already in the bill, in the sense that it specifically refers to certain CFRs for apprenticeship, CFR 29 and 30, as well as CFR 5, which is a wage and hour regulation for prevailing wage. Unless it's spelled out in IRA, it can't change other laws. Rulemaking won't change other laws that have 40 up to 85 years of history, right? IRA has to walk within those regulations. So by being an expert on those, a company can navigate. Now, what does it mean for this room, right? Is the states that are able to demonstrate the capacity to deliver high quality apprenticeships for businesses are going to be a targeted state for investment by these developers and project owners. We've worked very closely with the largest developer in the world. We put 70 veterans on their job sites in the last 2 years as a pilot program, and they're huge fans. And they are asking us, where is apprenticeship going to be easy and where is it going to be difficult? And what better way than to demonstrate that than we were able to get an apprenticeship registered here within less than a week. Most people, when you read articles about the apprenticeship system, often they're very critical of the infrastructure and say they take forever to build and they can't get them registered. Well, employers need to listen to experts. The experts are there to serve the employer, but the experts have some knowledge and framework, and if everyone's going to be collaborative and really work, we can figure out a way that make this apprenticeship very flexible, serve your needs, but at the same time, something that is going to be easy to translate and use, not just here, but in other states. And I will tell you, when people think Department of Labor, they think often OSHA or wage and hour, especially if you're a construction company, and they get a little nervous about the idea of having a registered apprenticeship. What am I opening the door to, right? I'm sure any employer in the room has thought about that. And that might have been one of the reasons why you didn't make that final step. But Office of Apprenticeship and these state apprenticeship agencies, they don't have a history of doing any kind of fines. I have never been able to identify a fine from Office of Apprenticeship. They are a technical assistance arm, and they've invested tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in supporting organizations like ACS to act as a middleman to support you. So we're partners with the Global Apprenticeship Network, and this is part of our target area to expand apprenticeships. And there's no cost to work with organizations like us to help you do it and do it right and make sure that you don't have a couple small little words that you could have left out of your apprenticeship standards and it cost you millions of dollars in lost benefits from just 3 words. For example, just to make it quick, if you don't put in your apprenticeship standards that, hey, they're going to earn 60% of the wage at this step, if you don't add in there 60% of the wage and fringe, then if you're working on a project that's subject to prevailing wages, you have to pay 100% of the fringe. And we say, well, why encourage that behavior, Nick? Well, it's because I want to make sure that we create a model that rewards employers for giving people an opportunity that they may not have considered to reach out to. So if you put artificial barriers that you got to pay a $13 fringe, all of a sudden they're going to say, why am I going to hire this person from this community? I can go find a full electrician and give them the 13 fringe. If I have to do it for the person who's brand new that just went through a pre-apprenticeship, if I only have to pay a $7 fringe, I'll go give that person an opportunity. And that's what opens the door now, right? And so I will tell everybody, DOL, everybody, they're really supportive to make sure that new programs are registered. Out of the top 12 engineering, procurement, construction companies in clean energy, DOL is currently with the ACS and DOL, we're registering 6 new standards this week out of the top 12. So the work is being done. The question is, are companies thinking about getting a registered apprenticeship is getting a marriage license, is what we call it. It's not a program yet. Then they got to start thinking, how are we going to operate it? And so from a policy perspective, that's what we've been discussing, is how do you invest in broader infrastructure to help employers, not just with the training, not just with the recruitment, but also how do they just do the basic components of managing their program? These companies currently, they have to reach deep in their pockets to figure out and throw resources at it when it can be done so much more efficiently by making investments in the infrastructure of the administrative component.
Thank you so much, Nick. I could see lots of heads. Trace, I think you and Nick need to plan a roadshow. Because I think that's the key. It's the practical knowledge and know-how, but also having the right partners to help you get there. So thank you for that. I know you could have a whole workshop, a whole day workshop on the IRA.
Next year,
next
right,
year. So thank you for that. Marty, you're a pretty renowned advocate for apprenticeships, and not just locally. I was in London a few weeks ago, and I mentioned I'm coming to Missouri, and I got some strange looks, like, why are you going to Missouri? And I said, I'm being invited to National Apprenticeship Week. And I was told by a colleague at the British Council that, well, the only person I know in Missouri is Marty Leathers. And I said, well, that's who's invited me. So his reputation precedes him. But given your work, given your perspective, and you're so open to learning, what do you think what do you need from the private sector? What more can the private sector do to engage on apprenticeship development, workforce development, and work-based learning?
Thank you for that, and my head might have more helium in it than the balloons outside after those gracious comments. You know, I'm passionate about the framework, and I was fortunate before appointed this role by our governor in 2017 that I worked with our community colleges, and a lot of my partners, including one of my former employees, is out here. And we helped put together a community college framework, one of the first in the nation, to say this is what we're going to do to step out front, to lean into registered apprenticeship, to lean into a new opportunity. You know, Missouri, we talked about this morning, we set this goal of, in 2019 we said, hey, by 2025, let's do something crazy and try to register 20,000 apprentices. And in May of 2022, 30 months early, we achieved that goal. Today we're around 27,000. As I said this morning, we're marching now towards new goals. But the beauty is 41% of those registered apprentices are in non-skilled trades. And that doesn't mean to disparage our skilled trades, because we kicked our summit off by going to the training center at IBEW. We are huge partners with AFL-CIO. We're huge partners with carpenters. But at the same time, we know that to expand, not only do we need to support and cultivate those programs, but we need to expand and engage employers in industries and other sectors, advanced manufacturing, technology, healthcare. And so we're able to do a number of things, education, right? All these new areas where we're able to say, listen, the model works. Let's call it either Missouri Apprentice Ready, which means it's not quite a fully registered apprenticeship, but it's really cool and it has all those qualities. Or it is what we call a MORAP program, which is Missouri Registered Apprenticeship Program. And so to start connecting those opportunities together. And then we have our great partners at the community colleges doing the same thing, our local workforce boards doing the same thing, Missouri Chamber of Commerce and Industry, who's just going gangbusters, getting really great competitive grants, bringing resources to the state to do what? To work with employers to help them diagnose their workforce challenges, to look at, frankly, old models that are broken and say, let's do something different. And by the way, let's give you credit for what you're already doing. And so I think if I'm talking to private sector, it's allow us to have the conversation, right? Allow us to have that opportunity that we might be able to connect an outcome to. Because I think for every employer we've met with and talked with, not one has said this is a bad idea, this is a waste of our time, we would never do this. It's always, well, I have these 12 other things I got to figure out, and maybe I'll put this also on the burner. Or, yeah, this is great, but there's this hurdle, and as soon as you can get me over that hurdle, we'll be ready. But the reality is we figured out, and with the expansion, in about a decade ago, the intermediary framework has just revolutionized apprenticeships, right? Because now we can do what Nick is doing and his team. We can do things that we're doing to really partner with the Office of Apprenticeship and say, nobody is here to issue anything punitive. We're here to, again, connect opportunity, to provide technical assistance. And by the way, in Missouri, we're funding a bunch of related training and instruction. And so our program and our model has been successful because we cultivate those intermediaries, but we don't do anything if an employer's not at the table. It starts with the employer, it starts with engaging the employer, cultivating the employer. The employer leads with their needs, and we then build frameworks around that. And then we put it out to the population, say, listen, we're going to recruit people. The other thing I like to say is, as we've expanded our apprenticeships in Missouri, nearly 85% of the apprentices that we have registered, that 27,000, they have not been new hires. There have been incumbent workers, individuals who already have been committed to a company, have proven themselves to a company. A company has said, I see something in this individual, let's elevate them up. Let's create a new kind of middle position for this new supervisor, for this new apprentice. And oh, by the way, we'll then bring new people in as entry level. So we've created in workforce development, our terms, a pipeline, right? A system in which we're bringing people in and we're moving people up. And oh, by the way, as our knowledge drains and people leave and we have to fill those gaps, we're going to do a ton of mentoring to keep those to keep that knowledge intact. So I think private sector is the leader. Private sector is the only way this works, but private sector needs to, I say needs, it sounds kind of punitive as well. Just give us the opportunity for us to show the outcomes that we can produce together.
It's having a relationship, I think, and understanding that you both have different needs, but like getting your marriage license, it's a process. So I'm going to open up for some questions, and I would invite you all to use the mics in the center of the room. So please feel free to direct to an individual in the panel or the whole panel. And while you're thinking of your questions, Nika, I want to ask you about the inclusion aspect again and how you think we reach underserved communities.
Yeah, I love that question. I think it's such an important one at this point in time. Over 2/3 of businesses acknowledge a lack of diversity on their tech teams, with about half of those same businesses saying that they're working to try to solve that. Having a variety of perspectives leads to innovative products, innovative services. It helps foster creativity. It can even open up new customer channels. And so when I think of inclusion, it is a need to have, it is a nice to have, but I also see it as a business imperative. And so the success stories that we want to start to scale are the ones where we're engaging leadership that looks like the learners that we're trying to attract to the sector. And so here's a couple of examples of the ways that we're doing this through scalable programs and collaborations with Black membership organizations. One is in New England that we have going on right now. It's called an AWS Certification Challenge. And we're partnering with 3 what I call professional associations for diversity in tech. Hack Diversity, the Black Tech Pipeline, and Restore Black America. These types of organizations reach the underrepresented groups that we're talking about, women, Black people, Hispanics who are missing from the sector. And by mission, they tell them about these opportunities in tech, and they bring them in. They give them professional mentoring in all of these different opportunities as they're connected to employers, and they give them a community of support in pursuit of these tech roles. And their members join up with them for no cost or low cost, the guidance that they provide and the networks that they give them. Our certification challenge is made up of a couple different things. It's instructor-led, there's also virtual online self-led, exam readiness, and then you go and you sit for your for a proctored exam for your foundational certification. It's CPC or the cloud practitioner certification, all over the course of about 4 to 6 weeks. And we've had a couple different cohorts in Massachusetts, I think 250 per cohort enroll in these challenges. Another one is that we recruit racially diverse training providers to another program. It's called the AWS Authorized Training Program. ATPs are trusted to deliver AWS courses, and they can do this through instructor-led, it can be virtual, they can become resellers themselves. There is a group called the National Center for Urban Solutions. They're out of Columbus, Ohio, and they recently became the first Black-owned and operated ATP by AWS. They have, NCUS has a nonprofit arm called NCUS Tech, where they have been delivering IT courses in urban communities for a really long time. And so they have a background of doing this in the communities where their learners live. And so I think this is going to be increasingly important. Their participation in the program comes at a time where we're starting to see more requests for instructors and mentors and presenters who are racially diverse, also gender diverse. And so I think that this racial visibility, this gender visibility, and familiarity with learners is going to be important as we pursue a diverse and skilled talent pipeline, not just in tech, but I think across other industries as well. It's just a tangible way to convince learners that if they can see it, then they can be it. And so these are just examples of cloud programming in the communities.
Thank you so much, Nika. Representation matters. That's it, right? And with that, I'm going to hand over now to our questions. Director Anna Hugh.
Yes, I have a question for y'all. Thank you so much for coming here to Missouri and sharing all your experiences and your insights. I'm Anna Hugh. I'm the director of the Missouri Department of Labor and Industrial Relations. We run the state's unemployment program, so we've been quite busy the last few years, and we're really glad to see that unemployment, at least here in the United States, and especially here in Missouri, is back to pre-pandemic levels or even lower. I think one of those big challenges, you've talked a lot about the competition for workers and not only retaining the sort of folks and offering them opportunities within your own organizations, but how are you looking at, I mean, Nanika, you talked about, again, having good visible representation out there, but for some of those other populations perhaps that we've not always traditionally looked at, whether it's reentry programs, whether, the challenge that Governor Parson gave to the state as being like a premier employer of the disabled community, like how are we turning those types of populations, which we know have maybe not always been traditionally engaged in the apprenticeship arena, but maybe we have new ways and new technologies and just maybe new perspectives of how to better, more broadly engage these populations as well. Thank you.
Well, we know that veterans have a large representation of people with disabilities, and that's partly maybe why we've been able to hit this specific target, because about 50% of our apprentices are veterans. ACS, 19.9% of our 1,200 apprentices over the last 4 years have self-identified as being disabled. That wasn't made just by the veterans in our program. That statistic was achieved because that's been a priority. As a disabled person myself, after being wounded in Iraq, I became a business owner because I felt like I was unemployable. And so I started a commercial insurance agency, which still pays my mortgage, and then started ACS because I wanted to do something with a bigger impact. And so what we've learned through that is the vast majority of those individuals, the roughly 260 people with disabilities, we did not require any kind of accommodation for. We've made accommodations. 53% of ACS, our 84 staff, are disabled. And we've made internal accommodations because that's a priority of our organization. But what we have been able to see is that is our second highest metric for retention in our apprenticeship, was the individuals with disabilities. The number one metric was veterans that decided to utilize their GI Bill benefits, because if they do, the only individual who benefits is the veteran. The apprenticeship doesn't get a dime, the employer doesn't get a dime. It only goes to the veteran, which is the way I like to see it. But it's an additional wage allowance that they receive on top of their apprentice wage, which is a retention tool, honestly. In Texas, that's $1,750 tax-free on top of the wages. I believe it's, if you were in Kansas City is where your program was, I looked it up a couple weeks ago, I believe it's $1,400 tax-free on top of their apprentice wage. What better way than to become a veteran-friendly employer and make sure that you're retaining them as you're developing their skills? They can afford a new career because they have a way to sustain themselves. So if employers are looking for, how do I not just develop an apprenticeship, but make sure my apprentices stay, consider populations like that. Because statistic after statistic shows that individuals with disabilities have the highest retention of any other demographic.
So, you know, thank you for sharing that, Nick. And you know, most state workforce programs have a, you know, Jobs for Veterans State Grant Program or connection to the State Veterans Commission. You know, I'm real proud with our team here in Missouri who works to serve our veterans and help connect them to sustainable employment. But we have a couple other cool programs. I know there's a great contingent from Missouri Department of Vocational Rehabilitation in the room, and they do a lot of work in supporting individuals with disabilities. And a few years ago, we were able to, right before the pandemic, create a registered apprenticeship program for the hospitality sector. For those that may not be aware, we have Branson, Missouri in the southwest corner, the beautiful Ozarks, and it is a destination place, a huge tourist place. And of course, we continue to need people who can support that economy. So we were able to, again, get the band together, bring in some local partnerships, focus with a group that probably is well known called Johnny Morris and Bass Pro, and put together a truly phenomenal opportunity for individuals with disabilities to work at some of those recreational and lodge facilities. The other big program that we talk a lot about is our Building Union Diversity Program. And if you were on the tour yesterday, you got to hear about that. And we're proud to be a partner with Missouri Works Initiative, the Carpenters Council, AFL-CIO to help increase and support access to registered apprenticeships in the construction trades in St. Louis, right here in Kansas City, and in Springfield, and soon in Southeast Missouri. And this is a program that there's a great team here that works with that is helping grow and flourish and really helping transform the lives by removing barriers, by increasing access and opportunity across the way. So I think that's a critical message. The last thing I'll just say is we work really closely with our friends that are here from the Missouri Department of Corrections. We were in a similar space not too long ago with the Reentry Summit, which is a huge drive in Missouri to work with justice-involved individuals. And we were able to create the first pre-release, it's also called Behind the Walls, but I know that that's not as appealing, a registered apprenticeship program in Southeast Missouri in the Boot Heel, and it was a hydroponics program where individuals could participate in the apprenticeship program and they were employed directly upon release to local employers in that space. And we're continuing to look at more of those types of opportunities. So I think it takes, like anything else, you have to be intentional about it. But you know, the workforce shortage is only the workforce shortage if we keep our minds closed, right? And so we think about expanding to populations who deserve to be served and who unfortunately have historically been left behind or left out of the equation. We can do a lot of great and exciting things.
Yeah, just real quickly, I just want to add to that. The question was great, and you're right. Missouri, the unemployment rate, I think as of October, is 2.4%. I mean, workers can be picky. I mean that's another piece of it. But the partnerships is a great question, and you know we do work with Concordance Academy. It is a reentry program. We work with them and partner with them, and that's something that if you ask a couple years ago, we wouldn't have considered, we wouldn't have looked at, but we have changed. For the disability side, the Starkloff Disability Institute is another great partner of ours that we work with. There's several veteran organizations that we work with locally, both for jobs and then not for jobs, just because it's the right thing to do. And for us, you know, in the pet industry, we provide support dogs, those types of things. So it goes beyond the employment in those industries. But I think, Marty, you hit on it. It's considering avenues that you wouldn't have thought about before. So yeah, appreciate that question. Thank you.
I'm conscious that we're eating into the next panel, so what I would like to suggest is get onto LinkedIn, connect with all of us who are active on LinkedIn. We can answer questions or direct your questions to Marty's team, and we'll give you feedback. But I want to thank my panel for the engaged responses, for the candidness about the challenges, the opportunities, the willingness to respond and change and learn. And it's been fascinating to listen to each of you, and thank you so much for your contributions.